Hello from Dublin. This session is not so much about technology, but it is about people who build this technology. Because I believe that the quality of technology we build is a reflection of our culture. And I also believe that this culture is built by each one of us. It is not something that can be deployed on us by some external entity. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Daria. I was born in Russia and later I moved to Portugal with my family. And for the last 8 years, I am living in Ireland and working for Microsoft, and I'm loving it. I have a collection of degrees, which I'm quite proud of, and none of them is a medical doctor. So please take this presentation as just a personal opinion of someone coming from an engineering discipline. And now let's move forward. We will talk about on-call, why there is on-call, where it is done, how it is done, and we will also look at some uncommon behaviors across happy teams that I identified during the last few months. And in the end, I will share with you a call for action so you can bring this positive change to your team as well. The dreadful on-call. Let's talk about it. A few years ago, on-call became part of my job obligations, and I always found it extremely stressful. It was unpredictable nature of it and lack of control I had over when things will happen. And also the fact that I was on call for a broad range of services where new features not always came together with the clear troubleshooting guides. So let's look at how on-call is defined by Wikipedia. It is on-call is intentionally unpredictable work schedules. And it seems like I wasn't the only one feeling stressed about it. I learned from the Catchpoint SRE report and from Jamie Wu talk at All Day DevOps earlier this year that on-call generates a lot of stress. And on-call is not specific to engineering profession. Let's look at some examples. So the first one is a study done by a Canadian hospital that says that median interval between pages across all specialty was 22 to 30 minutes. It doesn't say how stress was measured by doctors, but I would assume that getting a pager every 22 to 30 minutes would be quite stressful. In firefighters, they showed high level of physiological stress when compared to normative healthy population. And 46% of police officers had above average chronic fatigue, and nearly 40% of them reported feeling drained. So on-call is not specific to engineering profession, and on-call is draining and stressful for all professions that need to deal with it. Now let's look a little bit into engineering on-call experience. As I mentioned a few years ago, I used to be on-call, and I didn't like it. And few times I tried to raise it, how stressful on-call was for me. But in most of the occasions, my colleagues looked at me and said, well, it's just work. There's nothing you can do about it. Just deal with it. And I felt like I had a wall around me, like I was the only one stressing about it and everyone was okay with it. Back then, concepts like empathy and psychological safety were not part of everyday engineers' vocabulary. I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago. And neither am I could articulate what was wrong with that answer. I thought it was right. I didn't have enough experience. I wasn't aware of any studies in the field. And I didn't have a mentor who could help me to dissecate this problem and to find a solution. Now let's imagine my colleagues acknowledged my feelings and shared their perspective, and that they said they also found it very stressful. If together we discussed how to make this less stressful for all of us, imagine if after raising this, we all started investing more time in documentation and in learning even more from incidents, or if we reviewed how on-call worked and we would try to support each other differently. Imagine if we dealt with this together and not in isolation. So this togetherness is about culture. Later, I came across this tweet from Cindy Sridharan, and it reminded me of those old times. Cindy says that if you think on-call is bad, you're responding negatively to a symptom. On-call reflects our engineering culture end to end, from building services to maintaining them. So imagine if in my situation, the result of us acknowledging that on-call was stressful would result in us doing better documentation, analyzing incidents more efficiently. It would drive in return more stability and more reliability into our platform. So culture influences the quality of technology. We are living in times where psychological safety and empathy are becoming part of every day in engineering profession, and it's great. It's finally here. There are more and more content on the subject and more happy teams that find the good on-call dynamics. I've been interviewing engineers and collecting survey results for the last 7 months to understand how happy teams do it. What is that common thing between them? And we will talk about those 7 common things that I identified. I'm sure there are more. Those 7 just resonated with my own experience in a way that I wanted to highlight them here. And just a disclaimer, it wasn't a low volume of pages and noisy alerts. It was a team culture. And each one of us is a direct influencer of this culture. Each one of us is agent of change that can act as a force multiplier for the entire team, or can also push all team down. Sometimes if someone is not happy and we are doing nothing about it, over time it will influence all the team. But culture is a very broad concept. Let's look into more details. How do we build psychological safety in our team? And before I start talking about SRE culture, I'd like to mention this book by Patrick Lencioni about 5 dysfunction of a team. And he's proposing this pyramid that made a lot of sense to me. Absence or lack of any of the components, such as trust, healthy conflict resolution practices, accountability, and other, they can impact team positive dynamics over time. And notice that trust is on the bottom of the pyramid. I recommend you to have a look at this book. And now let's go back to SRE world. And let's talk about blameless culture, because for me, this is everything. It's okay to fail. So what happens when we fail? There are a lot of studies about psychological and physiological responses and individual experiences when they are impacted by stress. There's all kind of hormonal response, and there are even long-term repercussions of the stress. We can get physically ill, and failure is one of the stress factors. This is why psychological safety and blameless culture are so important. So I came across the book called Software Engineering in Google, which is published by O'Reilly, and it defined psychological safety as your team members feel like they can be themselves without fear of negative repercussions in the situation where failing is one of the outcomes, because failure is a way of learning, and learning a lot and very quickly. So I really love this definition, and I really loved the entire book, so I recommend you as well. It's important that you create safe space to discuss how things went wrong without focusing on an individual. But at the same time, you need to make sure that you upload individual successes. So don't focus on an individual when you are talking about negative things. Focus on processes, technology. But when you are talking about successes, I would recommend you to focus on an individual. Praise people when there are reasons to do that. Build other people confidence by recognizing their achievements. How happier teams did this? So they had multiple ways. They had dedicated meetings to do detailed incident retrospectives, of course. They followed 5 whys process in this case. Blameless culture was a critical component of all discussions, and those were always focused on platform and processes and never on an individual. Well, sometimes mistakes were made, but there would be multiple people who would act as a moderator, who would pause and refocus attention into the blameless culture and focusing on processes and the platform. And everyone felt safe sharing their opinion as a result. Now let's talk about next common factor, and it was a technical literacy. Hands-on experience was one of the big contributors to on-call satisfaction. Happy and successful teams had established effective onboarding processes, invested in training, and in keeping their documentation up to date. And remember, just recognizing that this investment is important is not enough. It requires continuous work from every team member. It also doesn't work if you have one team member who is responsible to do it all and everybody else focuses on something else. It's need to be everyone's effort. Everyone should dedicate time to create content, review other people's content, and also to upskill yourself. You need to assure that your leadership creates space for this type of work, which leads us to the next slide. It's important to do proactive documentation, both internally and externally. Don't wait to be asked. Write troubleshooting guide. Document your feature. Write customer-facing documentation. Knowledge that is not shared in a structured way will be lost. How many times I thought to myself that, oh, I know it now. I will never forget it. And then 6 months later, I try to remember details and like, oh, I can't remember critical details. And I didn't write it down. So I'm sure that I'm not the only one experiencing this. Organize a training session or brown bag on something you feel confident about. Lack of confidence in tool and processes can be a big influencer of an on-call experience. The best way to build confidence in something is by doing it. I like how Alex Hidalgo, author of SLO book, once said, the best incident response tool is training and practice. I really love this. And now let's talk about communication and collaboration. Good communication and collaboration have force multiplier effect on team efficiency. Among teams I observed, there was a pattern in how happy and successful teams approached it. They had multiple weekly meetings, but it wasn't just about having meetings. It was about how meeting dynamic worked. So those meetings were attended by 90% of team members, and the manager was there as well. Manager actively contributed, everyone actively contributed, but manager wasn't leading it. There was a selected moderator for each meeting instance. And this helped to build the bottom-up culture with top-down support. And engineers, what did they do during these meetings? Like different meetings dedicated to different themes. Like there was meeting to review incident trends, systemic problems, documentation improvements, automation, like multiple themes. Any follow-ups resulting from those meetings would have a work item logged and owner identified. And this is important because this resulted in accountability and ownership culture. How do we build it? Well, we built it first by making sure that we track and we commit and we complete work that is identified. But it also works by celebrating achievements. And the teams who had happy on-call experience had recurrent engineering reviews and demo meetings to do exactly that. Meetings had different dynamics. One of the meetings had predefined agenda, and another meeting had an open mix style. So both of them, structured and unstructured, established different team collaboration dynamics. And even if demo was 5 minutes demo, or even if demo was, I wrote the script, this is how it works, and this is what I'm trying to solve, it already was enough. That helped to celebrate achievements and also bring everyone together and would initiate discussion sometimes that would help to do things better. And obviously, any blockers and changes in priority were timely communicated, discussed, and I just loved attending those meetings because I would always learn a lot from them. And now let's talk about feedback loops. Teams that were happy with on-call experience had very effective feedback loop to assure everyone's voice is heard and on-call satisfaction is measured over time. On-call engineers would fill in surveys as soon as their on-call was over, and it also included verbose feedback about short and midterm improvement recommendations. Survey results were regularly reviewed and actioned. It's not enough just to have everyone filling in survey and then nobody looks at that. It's need to be ongoing effort. So this is one of the way to build feedback loop. Another way, which I learned a year ago from another SREcon, was by doing one-on-one interviews. So any way that works for you, I recommend you to do it. And finally, empathy. Highly satisfied teams demonstrated high levels of empathy, looking proactively at opportunities to support each other. So how do we define empathy? I like the definition by Daniel Goleman. For example, he says that the best kind of empathy is the compassionate empathy. With this kind of empathy, we not only understand the person's predicament and feel with them, but are spontaneously moved to help if needed. I love this. And another definition of empathy comes from Andrea Goulet, which I have on the screen, which says that empathy is proactive perspective taking and problem solving. She defines it as an empathy definition more geared towards engineers. So make sure that you practice your empathy. And remember, this is a call for action. Write troubleshooting guides. Make sure that you do documentation proactively. Build feedback loops if you don't have any in place. It can be survey, it can be an interview. Make sure that communication flows between inside your team and between different teams. Make sure you communicate a lot and take ownership of a problem. You have a noisy monitor, review it. You have a documentation gap which you have been coming across over and over and telling to yourself, oh, I really need to fix this. This is there, but then it never happens. Well, take ownership, fix it. Think about force multiplying effect that your action will take. Because once you fix it for yourself, it will propagate through all other on-call experiences for other team members. Make sure that you identify common problems across teams and you build horizontal work streams and connect different teams to solve the problem. This way, you will solve problem once, but it will impact everybody. And practice empathy. There are plenty of resources online. Find the one that works for you. Practice empathy and build trust. I usually see that consistency and empathy together, they do build trust. Make sure that you are accountable to yourself and that you are consistent. And praise other people's successes. Make sure that they are recognized. And fail. Don't be afraid to fail. Fail is a way of learning fast. It's the best way to learn. And share your experience. Organize a case, like publish case study, organize a brown bag, do a demo. If there is no placeholder in your organization to do this, create it. Everybody will be thankful and will take value out of it. Find a mentor. It helps me a lot to have someone senior to who I can talk about some problem and who helps me to dissecate it in a way that we both find a possible solution or at least a path to a solution. And also become a mentor. Help your colleagues or help people in your organization to grow. Becoming a mentor helps you to practice your empathy, because by being a mentor, you need to walk in someone else's shoes to help them. And this way, empathy will become one of your day-to-day muscles. And I would like to thank you. All pictures in this presentation are from unsplash.com, except my photo and the book cover. And you have my Twitter handler on the screen. And after this presentation is over, I will be on Slack to answer any of your questions, or you can find me on Twitter and I'll be happy to help you out. Thank you very much.